Hello and welcome to this review of my Amstrad KB7. As the more veteran of my watchers will know, almost exactly 2 years ago I did a review on a bunch of Amstrad PCW keyboards which were absolutely horrible. They were the first keyboards I completely tore to shreds because they were pathetic pieces of plastic poop. With the most awful switches I tried until that point, some crappy spring over membrane thing to keep the cost down. That was a black page in the history of British computer manufacture. This time we look at a later model, the KB7, about which I've been able to find very little except that it seemed to have shipped with the Amstrad Mega PC, possibly among others. The Mega PC was basically an Amstrad PC with a Sega Mega Drive inside. That's a Sega Genesis in America. And it's more or less a competitor to the Sega Terra Drive, although that was only released in Japan. Unlike the PCW computer, whose keyboards I've reviewed before, the Mega PC wasn't made with the sole purpose of being cheap. Instead, the Mega PC was both overpriced and outdated right when it came out. Considering it came out in 1993 and had only a 386 processor when the 486 was already out and the Pentium came out that same year, it didn't have much power to offer, although apparently it was better built than the Terra Drive and had better specs. However, both weren't very popular and they failed on the market. The increased price relative to the PCW keyboards is noticeable, as the KB7 is a much better keyboard than the crappy PCWs, but it's still not as notable as the Terra Drive keyboard, which is an Alps buckling spring Model M-like keyboard with an amazing black and dark grey colour scheme and Japanese characters on the keycaps. In fact, it's one of the best looking keyboards of all time. So, the Terra Drive is definitely the more desirable of the two for people who have the correct priorities, namely the looks and typing sound of your keyboard. I mean, who cares about RAM and processing speeds anyway? The KB7 was built by BTC, the king of dome keyboards, but this keyboard is actually one of BTC's older tech models that still sport their foam and foil switches, specifically the tactile variant. Last week I reviewed a rather notable Keytronic foam and foil keyboard, and previously I reviewed the linear BTC foam and foil 5339R0, but this is the first time we're looking at the tactile BTC foam and foil switches. I suspect that BTC have rather shamelessly ripped off Keytronic's switches because apart from copying the exact same mechanism and nearly identical shape, they originally even used a keycap mount that appears to be the same as Keytronic's, and even the font on the keycaps was the same. That said, their most well-known incarnation of the switch uses a readily identifiable Cherry MX mount, which means you can use them with modern keycaps. Now this tactile version uses massive buckling rubber sleeves that slid over the sliders to provide return forces, as well as a tactile key feel a bit similar to Keytronic's discrete buckling rubber sleeves, but cheaper to manufacture I guess. The key feel on many foam and foil switches is rather mushy because you're literally pressing down on a sponge, but as I've noted before, tactile switches reduce this feel a bit because you kind of shoot past the mush when you get over the tactile bump. The tactility is similar to that of a rubber dome, but snappier, and overall it reminds me a bit of Topra, which is also a capacitive switch as it happens, although the BTC was rated for about 3 times the lifetime per key. They're nowhere near as snappy as their later dome with slider switches, which have a very similar looking slider and they're also MX mount, but those later switches are obviously not capacitive, so that's a trade-off. You can distinguish them from each other because the dome with slider switches don't have external springs or rubber sleeves. Now I found the linear version, which uses coil springs, to be so responsive that I kept accidentally triggering the keys when I was playing games, so I did what I called a Mitsumi mod. I used buckling rubber sleeves from a tactile Mitsumi board with conductive sliders to make the WASD cluster both tactile and stiffer. As it happens, when you do that mod, the resulting key feel is in my opinion better than either of BTC's own version of the switch. It becomes quite snappy and fairly satisfying to use, so even for the tactile model I'd recommend Mitsumi modding it. Mitsumi boards such as this KPQ model, about which I'll be doing a review in the future at some point as well, are extremely common, so sourcing a set of sleeves is pretty easy. Overall, the stock switches aren't bad. They're probably the best foam and foil switches I've tried to date, or at least the best intact ones, as last week's were very nice but had completely decomposed. Mitsumi modding them definitely improves the feel in my opinion though, making them snappier and even less mushy. The keycaps are typically BTC, they're thin ABS with cheap printing, in this case they're pad printed, and the legends on quite a few of the keys have come partially or almost completely off due to use. Also very BTC is the escape key, which is 1.25 units big, something they had a bit of a hard-on for. The caps are some of the crappiest I've ever seen, although, being MX mount, you can of course change them for nicer caps. In fact, as you might be able to tell, the 4 key isn't original, the board came without it when I found it. I sourced this cap from another BTC board as I recall it. I should say that I do really like the font on them though. It looks like Helvetica, which is already very good, but they also made the lettering on the modifier keys slightly bigger than normal. I mean, compare this to a standard 80-101 key cap. And I think that suits the caps very well. It should be said that although Keytronics keyboards didn't come with MX mount sliders, in fact they used their own mount, which isn't compatible with anything else, KT used excellent ABS double shots instead. Surprisingly, and especially if you keep the build quality of the PCW keyboards in mind, the build quality of the KB7 is actually kind of okay. It weighs only 900 grams, it's pure plastic, and it flexes a little bit, although not that much. It feels quite taut and well put together. I mean, it's nothing fantastic or anything, but by Amstrad standards, it's amazing. I mean, look at this, I've held it for over 10 seconds now, and it still hasn't fallen apart. It comes with a fairly standard coiled cable with a PS2 plug at the end, and it's got simple but functional flip-out feet. And here is the model sticker of the keyboard showing its type KB7, made in Taiwan. One thing to note is the visual design, which is based on slight swoops and sharp angles, so it's a rather minimalist design. I have to say it's not an ugly board, even if there's not a lot of visual flair going on. Even the logo sticker is quite bland, but then again I don't think Amstrad was ever a byword for quality, so I guess it's not something that you want to show off. Still, overall it's not a bad board, and unlike many of the boards I review, it's still kind of relevant in the modern day. It has a Topra-like feel, capacitive sensing with full N-key rollover, a standard layout, and it even mounts MX keycaps. Now, I know it doesn't have backlighting or anything, but many people don't actually give a shit about that, and while I can get the argument some people bring up for high rollover, and sometimes backlighting can look kinda cool, let's be honest, there really isn't a reason why you should need it. That's it for this review. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and following is a typing demonstration of me typing on this keyboard.